Welcome to my YouTube channel, The Silence Before the Storm. Grace had spent her entire life loving her son more than herself. From the moment Daniel was born, she had built her world around him, his laughter, his dreams, his little victories. She had been a single mother, after losing her husband in an accident when Daniel was barely 4. Every bruise she carried, every sleepless night she endured, every meal she skipped, it was all for him. Her little boy had grown into a man now, a handsome, confident, successful man. But the warmth she once felt from his smile was fading, replaced by a coldness she could neither understand nor accept. When Daniel married Emma 2 years ago, Grace thought her family had grown. She imagined herself sharing recipes, laughter, and quiet evening teas with her daughter-in-law. Instead, she found herself treated like an uninvited guest in her own son's home. Emma was beautiful, tall, elegant, and smart, but her eyes carried a subtle sharpness whenever they fell on Grace. Her words were always polite, but her tone carried quiet irritation, as if Grace's very presence was an inconvenience. Still, Grace tried. She cooked their favorite meals, folded their laundry, and waited for their smiles. But Daniel had changed. One quiet Sunday morning, Grace stood by the window, watching the sun touch the curtains. She was making breakfast when she heard Daniel's voice echo from the living room. "Mom," he called, his tone already laced with impatience. "Yes, Daniel," she said, wiping her hands on her apron and walking toward him. He was holding a bill in his hand. "Did you order something online again?" Grace frowned. "No, I didn't." He pointed to the paper. "It's an electricity bill. Look at the amount. You've been leaving lights on all night again, haven't you?" Grace's lips parted slightly in surprise. "Daniel, the lights were on because you both were out late. I stayed awake waiting for you." "Don't start that again, Mom," Daniel snapped, throwing the bill onto the table. "You're not the only one living here, you know. We can't afford wastefulness." Grace felt her chest tighten. "I wasn't wasting anything, Daniel. I was just—" "Enough," he interrupted, rubbing his forehead. "Emma and I have discussed this. You need to start being more responsible. You can't keep treating this house like it's your old one." Her old one? The home she had built with her late husband. The home where she had raised him with love, sacrifice, and tears. Grace's throat burned, but she said softly, "Daniel, I never meant—" That was when Emma walked in. "Daniel, honey, don't stress yourself," she said sweetly, slipping her arm through his. Her eyes briefly met Grace's, calm, composed, yet condescending. "Your mother probably doesn't understand how much bills add up these days. She's from another time." "Another time." The words sliced through Grace like a blade. "I understand numbers, Emma," Grace said, her voice trembling but firm, and I understand respect too." Emma's lips curved faintly, almost amused. "Of course, Grace. No one's questioning that." Daniel sighed, stepping between them. "Enough, both of you. Please." He picked up his car keys and muttered, "I need some air." Grace stood frozen as he walked out the door, leaving the scent of his cologne and the echo of his irritation behind. That night, Grace sat in her small room, staring at the photo on her bedside table. It was of Daniel when he was 10, smiling proudly beside the bicycle she'd worked extra shifts to buy. Her heart ached for that little boy, the one who used to run to her after school, the one who once said, "Mom, you're my whole world." Now he barely looked at her. Days passed. The house grew quieter. Daniel and Emma spent most evenings out, and when they were home, they stayed in their room, laughing behind closed doors. Grace tried to ignore the loneliness that pressed against her ribs, but it became harder every day. One evening, she prepared a full dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal Daniel loved as a child. She wanted to see his smile again, just once. When they arrived, Daniel looked tired, and Emma was scrolling through her phone. "I made dinner," Grace said softly. "Your favorite." Emma didn't even glance up. "We already ate, Grace." Grace blinked. "Oh, I didn't know." Daniel sighed, loosening his tie. "Mom, you don't have to cook every day. We're busy. We eat out sometimes." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the spoon down. "I just wanted to surprise you both." Emma gave a tight smile. "That's sweet, but maybe next time ask first. Food waste is such a problem, you know." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I'll remember," she whispered. She spent the rest of the night packing away the untouched food, listening to their laughter echo faintly from upstairs. A week later, the storm finally came. It was a Sunday morning again. Grace was doing laundry when she noticed Emma's expensive silk dress had lipstick stains on it. She panicked, terrified she'd ruin it if she washed it wrong, so she went to ask Emma. Emma, she called softly, knocking on their bedroom door. I just wanted to ask. But when she opened the door slightly, she froze. Emma was on the phone, her tone sharp and irritated. Yes, I told you not to call me when he's home, Emma hissed. You'll ruin everything. Grace stepped back in shock, her heart hammering. Who was Emma talking to? Before she could process, Emma turned and saw her. Grace, what are you doing? Grace stammered. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to ask about your dress. Emma's expression changed instantly. She slammed the phone down and stormed toward her. You have no right to enter our room without permission. Do you understand? Grace tried to explain. I knocked. Don't lie, Emma snapped. You were eavesdropping, weren't you? No, I swear I wasn't. Daniel walked in. Daniel walked in just then, hearing raised voices. What's going on? Emma's eyes filled with fake tears. Your mother barged into our room and started accusing me of things. She's been spying on me, Daniel. Grace's heart stopped. That's not true. Daniel's face hardened. Mom, please tell me that's not true. I wasn't spying, Grace whispered, voice trembling. I just came to ask about laundry. Enough, Daniel shouted. I've had enough of this. You've been causing tension in this house since day one. Why can't you just respect boundaries? Grace's lips quivered. Daniel, Then it happened. In one instant of fury and humiliation, he raised his hand and slapped her. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Grace stumbled back, clutching her cheek, staring at him in disbelief. Her son, her little boy. The same hands that once clung to her for comfort had just struck her. Emma stood there silently, a flicker of satisfaction hiding behind her tears. Grace whispered, her voice breaking, Daniel, you hit me? He froze, realizing what he'd done, but the damage was already carved deep. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Grace slowly straightened, her eyes glistening, not with anger, but with an unbearable sorrow. I gave you everything, she said softly, and now I have nothing left to give. She walked past him, her steps small but steady as tears streamed down her face. Behind her, Daniel stood frozen, his palm still burning, his soul slowly beginning to understand the weight of what he had done. The son who lost his mother's blessing. The house fell into silence after that night, a silence so thick that even the ticking clock sounded like thunder. Grace didn't cry loudly. She didn't scream or curse. She simply went to her room, closed the door, and sat on her bed in the dark, staring at nothing. Her cheek still stung, but the pain in her heart was deeper, an ache that reached the core of her being. She could still hear the echo of the slap in her head replaying over and over like a cruel reminder. For hours, she sat motionless, the night stretching endlessly around her. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn. The world outside was still gray, quiet. She moved like a shadow through the house, gathering her few belongings, her late husband's photograph, her rosary, her old shawl, and a small box of memories that once belonged to Daniel as a child. His baby socks, his first school medal, his little drawings. She packed everything into a small bag. As she zipped it shut, she paused and looked around the room. It wasn't really hers anymore. It felt like a guest room, a space she was tolerated in, not loved. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Goodbye, my son." Then quietly, she opened the front door and stepped into the morning mist. When Daniel woke up, he felt disoriented. His head was pounding from a night of guilt and confusion. He remembered everything, the anger, the accusations, the slap. He sat up suddenly, his chest tightening as the image of his mother's face flashed before him. The shock, the tears, the way she had looked at him like she didn't even recognize her own child. "Grace?" Emma mumbled from beside him, half asleep. "What's wrong?" "Where's Mom?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Emma yawned. How should I know? Probably in her room sulking. But something in his gut told him otherwise. He threw on his shirt and went straight to his mother's room. It was empty. The bed was neatly made. The pillow still carried the faint scent of her perfume, lavender and soap. He noticed the small wooden cross that always hung beside her bed was gone. So was her old suitcase. "Emma!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "She's gone!" Emma frowned, sitting up. "What do you mean gone?" "She left." Daniel's voice trembled as he ran through the house calling out, "Mom, Mom, please." But there was no answer, only silence. Grace had taken a bus to the small town she grew up in, a place called Willowbrook, quiet and peaceful, surrounded by hills. She rented a tiny room near the old church using what little savings she had left. The priest, Father Collins, was kind enough to offer her small work, tending to the church garden and cleaning the prayer hall. He noticed her sadness but didn't pry. "The Lord brings storms to test our strength," he told her one afternoon. Grace only smiled faintly. "I think my storm has already taken everything from me, Father." He nodded softly. "Even storms pass, my child." She didn't reply. Her heart didn't believe it yet. Days turned into weeks. Back in the city, Daniel was falling apart. He couldn't sleep. Every night he saw her eyes in his dreams, that look of betrayal, the disbelief. He stopped going to work for a few days. His colleagues called, but he ignored them. Emma, however, was growing impatient. "Daniel, you have to stop this. Your mother will come back when she's ready." He turned on her sharply. "You don't understand. She left because of me." Emma crossed her arms. "Oh, please, don't make this more dramatic than it was. She crossed the line. She was snooping around and you reacted. She's fine." Daniel stared at her. "You think hitting my own mother was fine?" Emma hesitated, her expression cold. "I didn't say that, but you can't keep blaming yourself forever." He walked away, muttering, "You wouldn't understand. You never had to lose someone who loved you unconditionally." That was the first time he noticed something. The way Emma's face hardened when he mentioned love. There was no empathy there, no guilt, just annoyance. One rainy afternoon, Daniel found himself driving aimlessly without knowing where he was going. His mind replayed old memories, his mother cooking for him, tying. His mother cooking for him, tying his tie before school, staying up late during his exams. He remembered how she used to save coins in a jar just to buy him his favorite chocolate. And he remembered the day she sold her wedding ring so he could attend university. And now he had repaid her with a slap. He pulled over on the side of the road and buried his face in his hands, sobbing. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel cried, truly cried. Not out of frustration or guilt, but from the unbearable weight of losing something he could never replace. Meanwhile, Grace had begun to find small comfort in the simplicity of her new life. Each morning, she watered the church garden, the lilies, roses, and small marigolds that reminded her of home. She would hum softly as the sun rose, feeling a quiet peace she hadn't felt in years. Yet every night when she lay in bed, she thought of Daniel. Did he eat? Did he sleep? Was he safe? Despite everything, a mother's heart doesn't stop loving, it only learns to hurt silently. One evening, as Grace was lighting candles in the church, Father Collins approached her. "Grace," he said kindly, "there's someone outside asking for you." Her heart skipped. "For me?" She stepped out and froze. Daniel stood there, drenched in rain, eyes swollen and red. He looked nothing like the proud, confident man she remembered. His suit was crumpled, his hair soaked, his hands trembling. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel fell to his knees. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, "please, forgive me." Grace's lips parted, but no words came out. "I can't live with myself," Daniel continued. "Every day I wake up hearing that sound, the sound of my hand hitting you. I hate myself for it. I hate what I've become." Tears streamed down his face as he said, "I was angry. I thought I was protecting Emma. But I wasn't protecting anyone. I was destroying you." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She took a step forward, her trembling hand reaching for him. "Daniel," she whispered, "why did you let her come between us?" He shook his head. "I don't know. I was blind. I thought I was doing the right thing, but when you left, it was like the world stopped making sense." He clutched her hand, pressing it to his forehead. "Please, Mom, come home. I'll make it right. I'll do anything." Grace stood still, her heart breaking again, not from pain this time, but from the sight of her son shattered before her. She gently touched his face. "Daniel, I forgive you." He looked up, shocked. You do?" She nodded slowly. "Because you're my son, and no matter what you did, I can't stop being your mother." He began to sob harder, wrapping his arms around her waist, clinging to her like a child. "I don't deserve you," he cried. Grace stroked his hair softly. "You don't have to deserve me, Daniel. You just have to remember who you are." They stood there for a long time, the rain washing away the bitterness, the anger, the guilt. But as they walked together toward the small church house, Grace knew something deep inside her heart. She could forgive him, but things could never go back to how they were. Trust, once broken, takes time to heal. That night, Daniel stayed with her in the small church quarters. He helped her cook dinner, something he hadn't done in years. They talked quietly about the past, about his father, his childhood, his mistakes. At one point, Grace looked at him and said softly, "Daniel, love should never make you cruel. Not to your mother, not to your wife, not to anyone. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know, I see it now. I just hope it's not too late. Grace smiled faintly. It's never too late to change, my son, but you must choose the right path now. The next morning, Daniel woke early, feeling something he hadn't in weeks. Clarity. He knew what he had to do. The truth about Emma and Daniel's redemption. The next morning arrived with a soft drizzle that brushed gently against the church windows. Daniel sat quietly at the small wooden table in Grace's little rented room, his eyes lost somewhere between guilt and peace. The storm inside him had calmed slightly, but the weight of regret still pressed against his chest. Grace was humming softly in the kitchen, preparing porridge. She looked different, calmer, maybe even content. For the first time in years, Daniel noticed the faint silver strands in her hair, the lines on her hands, the gentle exhaustion of a woman who had given her entire life to others. Mom, he said quietly, can I help you with that? Grace turned, surprised, but smiling. You can stir it for me if you like. Daniel stood beside her, holding the spoon awkwardly. The warmth of the moment reminded him of his childhood, mornings before school when she'd braid his hair, press a kiss on his forehead, and whisper, "Make me proud, my little man." But that little boy was gone, replaced by a man who had forgotten the meaning of love. When breakfast was ready, they ate in silence. Grace didn't ask when he would return home. She didn't speak of Emma. She simply let the quiet fill the space between them, healing them slowly. Afterward, Daniel said softly, "Mom, I want you to come back with me." Grace looked at him. "Back to the house?" "Yes, I can't stay there without you. It doesn't feel like home." Her eyes softened. "Home isn't about walls, Daniel. It's about hearts that love you. You need to decide whether that heart still beats for the right reasons." He frowned slightly, unsure of what she meant. Back in the city, when Daniel returned home that evening, the house felt strangely empty. He walked through the door, half expecting Emma to greet him, but the only sound was the echo of his footsteps. "Emma?" he called, no answer. He checked their bedroom. The closet door was slightly open. Inside, several of Emma's clothes were missing, her suitcase too. Then he noticed a note on the dresser. It read, "Daniel, I can't stay in a house where I'm not understood or appreciated. You've changed since your mother left. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while. Don't try to find me. Emma." Daniel read the letter twice. The words didn't sting. They felt empty, hollow, like a lie hiding behind politeness. He sat down heavily on the bed, rubbing his temples. Something inside him whispered that this wasn't the full truth. The phone call. 2 days later, Daniel received a call from his old college friend, Jason. "Hey man," Jason said hesitantly. "I don't know if I should be saying this, but I saw Emma last night." Daniel froze. "You what?" "She was at the Velvet Room, with someone. Looked pretty cozy, if you know what I mean." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Who was she with?" "I think his name's Adrian. Used to work in your company's marketing department before you fired him." Daniel's heart sank. Adrian, a tall, charming guy who had once openly flirted with Emma at a company party. He had even warned Emma to keep distance from him back then, and she had laughed it off. Without another word, Daniel ended the call, his hands shaking. The truth was clawing its way to the surface. Confrontation. That evening, Daniel drove straight to the Velvet Room, his heart pounding. The neon lights flickered against the rain-drenched pavement. Inside, the hum of music and laughter filled the air, but Daniel's eyes scanned only for one face. And then he saw her, Emma, sitting at a corner table with Adrian, her hand resting on his arm, laughing softly, the same laugh she once reserved for Daniel. He stood frozen for a moment, disbelief anchoring him. Then, with a deep breath, he walked straight toward them. Emma's laughter died as she saw him. Her face turned pale. "Daniel, don't," he said quietly, voice trembling with anger. "Don't you dare say my name." Adrian stood up nervously. "Hey man, relax. It's not what it looks like." Daniel's glare cut him off. "You can leave before I forget how to control myself." Adrian swallowed hard and left quickly. Emma stood, trying to compose herself. "Daniel, please, it's not what it looks like," he hissed. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone. You made me believe my mother was the problem when all along it was you." Her voice trembled. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "You made me hit her, Emma. You stood there watching, knowing I was wrong, and you said nothing. You let me destroy the only person who ever truly loved me." Emma's eyes welled with tears. "Daniel, I was scared." "No," he said, shaking his head. You were selfish. You wanted me to choose you no matter who it hurt, and I was too blind to see it." He stepped closer, his voice lowering, almost breaking. "You made me lose my mother, Emma, and now you've lost me." He turned and walked out, leaving her in silence as the rain poured up, washing away whatever false love had bound them. The long drive home, Daniel drove for hours that night, rain blurring his vision. His mind replayed every moment, his mother's voice, her tears, her forgiveness. He realized something then. True love isn't loud, it isn't manipulative, and it doesn't demand proof. It simply gives, and his mother had given everything. He parked his car outside the church house, stepped out into the rain, and walked to Grace's door. When she opened it, her eyes widened in surprise. "Daniel, what are you doing here at this hour?" He looked exhausted, drenched but peaceful. "I found out the truth, Mom." She sighed softly. "About Emma?" He nodded. "She betrayed me, and I almost lost you because of her." Grace reached out and gently cupped his face. "You didn't lose me, Daniel. You just lost your way." He lowered his gaze, tears mixing with the rain. "I don't know how to live with what I've done." She smiled faintly. "You start by being better, by choosing love over pride, kindness over anger." He looked up at her, eyes glistening. "Can I stay here, just for a while?" "Of course," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. A mother's love reborn. Weeks turned into months. Daniel found a small job in the nearby town while Grace continued her church work. They rebuilt their bond, not overnight, but slowly, with patience and truth. Every evening, they shared stories, laughter, and quiet prayers. Daniel cooked sometimes, clumsily but earnestly. Grace would tease him, saying, "You've come a long way from burning toast." He'd smile. "I had a good teacher." Though the scars of the past remained, they no longer hurt the same way. Grace often thought about how life had come full circle. The son she once raised had returned to her not as a boy, but as a humbled man. One final visit. One Sunday morning, Daniel drove back to the city for one last time. He sold the house that had once been filled with coldness and lies, and donated part of the money to the church. When he returned, Grace was tending the garden. He handed her a small envelope. "Mom, this is for you. I sold the house." Grace looked at him, startled. "Daniel, that was your home." He shook his head. "No, my home is wherever you are." Tears welled in her eyes as she hugged him. "You've grown, my son. You've truly grown." Months later, spring arrived. The church garden bloomed brighter than ever, lilies, daisies, and marigolds swaying under the sunlight. Grace sat on the bench, her hands folded in peace. Daniel sat beside her, sketching quietly in his notebook, something he hadn't done since he was young. A soft breeze passed, carrying the scent of earth and forgiveness. Grace looked at her son and smiled. "You know, Daniel, forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. It's choosing to live with love despite it." He smiled back. "And love means never raising your hand to someone who gave you theirs." Grace nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "You finally understand." That night, Daniel wrote a letter, not to Emma, but to his younger self. "Dear Daniel, if you ever forget again what love means, remember her eyes, the ones that looked at you when you had nothing and still saw everything. Remember her hands, the ones that built your world. And never forget that respect is the language of love. You hurt her once, don't ever do it again." Daniel. He folded the letter and placed it inside his mother's memory box. The story of a slap had begun with pain, but it ended with redemption, not because time healed it, but because love did. Grace never mentioned that night again. She didn't need to. The silence between them had turned into something sacred, a reminder that forgiveness, when given freely, can rebuild even the most shattered hearts. And Daniel, the son who once lost his mother's blessing, had finally earned it back. The new beginning. 5 years had passed since that night when Daniel had knelt in the rain before his mother. The world had changed quietly around them. No more bitterness, no more shouts echoing through empty rooms. They lived a simple life in Willowbrook now, surrounded by laughter, garden soil, and the tolling bells of the church. Daniel had built a small design studio on the edge of town, naming it Grace and Son Interiors. When people asked about the name, he would smile and say, "Because everything I'm started with Grace." Grace never asked for anything in return. Her heart had already healed the moment she saw her son live with kindness again. But deep inside, Daniel carried an unspoken wish. to make the world see his mother the way he saw her now, not as a forgotten widow, not as a victim of cruelty, but as a woman whose strength had rebuilt a man's soul. 2. A Festival of Hearts. Every spring, the town of Willowbrook held its annual Festival of Hearts, celebrating families and community service. That year, Father Collins insisted Daniel take charge of decorating the town square. Daniel agreed, but only on one condition. "I'll do it," he said, "if you let me add a special tribute." The priest smiled knowingly. "To your mother?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, to all mothers like her, who love even when they are broken." 3. The Unveiling. When the day arrived, the whole town gathered in the square. Lanterns hung from every tree, strings of lights danced in the wind, and the air smelled of roses and hope. In the center stood a covered statue draped in white cloth. Daniel stood beside it, nervous but determined. Grace, dressed in a pale blue shawl, stood quietly at the back, unaware of what her son had planned. Father Collins took the stage first. "Tonight," he announced, "we celebrate those who mend hearts, who give without asking, our mothers, our quiet heroes." He gestured to Daniel, and a son who once lost his way but found grace again wishes to speak. Daniel stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. He looked out, his voice soft but steady. "5 years ago," he began, "I was a man filled with pride and blindness. I thought love was about control. I thought respect was something I could demand instead of give." He paused, his gaze finding grace in the crowd. "But then I hurt the one person who had given me everything, my mother, and that moment became my life's greatest shame and my greatest lesson." He took a deep breath. "Tonight I stand before you not as a successful man, but as a changed one, because one woman chose to forgive me when I didn't deserve it. She taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength. That love isn't possession, it's freedom." The audience watched, silent, moved. Daniel continued, his eyes glistening. "I made the statue to honor her and every mother who has ever been silenced, hurt, or forgotten, but still chooses to love." He pulled the cloth away. Underneath stood a beautiful bronze sculpture. A mother with open arms, her palms gentle, lifting her grown son from the ground. At the base were engraved the words, "Grace, the hands that never stopped holding me." The crowd gasped and then applause. Long, heartfelt, thunderous applause. Grace stood frozen, her eyes filled, her lips trembling. Slowly she walked toward the statue. The light from the lanterns flickered across her face as tears traced down her cheeks. Daniel stepped down and took her hand. "Mom," he whispered, "this is for you. For every meal you skipped so I could eat, every prayer you whispered when I lost my way, every tear you hid so I wouldn't see." Grace's voice broke. "Oh, Daniel." He smiled through tears. "I can't erase the past, but I can make sure the world knows who you really are." The crowd began chanting softly, "Grace, Grace, Grace." And for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not just as a mother, but as a woman whose love had changed a life. 4. Emma's Return. The festival ended and peace filled the air, but fate had one more page to turn. A few weeks later, Daniel received a letter. It was from Emma. "Daniel, I heard about the festival and what you did for your mother. I won't ask you to forgive me, I don't deserve that. But I wanted you to know I've changed. I've left the life that poisoned me. Your strength inspired me. I hope someday I can find the peace you found." Emma, Daniel read it quietly, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his journal. He didn't hate her anymore. The pain was gone, replaced by understanding. She had been a lesson, not a curse. When Grace found him looking thoughtful, she asked, "Was it from her?" He nodded. "And what did you feel when you read it?" He smiled faintly. "Grateful, because if not for her, I might never have learned what love really means." Grace touched his shoulder. "That's the right answer." 5. The Last Gift. Years passed peacefully. Daniel's business flourished, known for its honesty and warmth. The Last Gift. Years passed peacefully. Daniel's business flourished, known for its honesty and warmth. People said his designs had soul, and he always replied, "That's my mother's doing." But time, gentle as it is, kept moving forward. Grace's hair turned fully silver, her steps slowed, and her laughter softened into quiet hums of prayer. One winter night, she sat by the window watching the snowfall. Daniel brought her tea and sat beside her. She looked at him with pride. "You kept your promise, Daniel. You made me proud." He smiled, holding her hand. "You're my reason for everything good in me." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then I can rest happy." That was the last night she ever said those words. Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep a few weeks later with the rosary in her hands and a smile on her lips. 6. The Eternal Grace. The whole town came together for her funeral. Daniel stood before the same church altar where his life had changed years ago. "I used to think loss was punishment," he said softly, "but my mother taught me it's love's final test. If you can live after losing the one who gave you life, it means they raised you right." He looked up, his voice steady now. "She once told me, love should never make you cruel. I'll spend the rest of my life living by those words." Outside, as the church bells rang, Daniel placed a single white lily on her grave. The inscription read, "Grace Reynolds, she taught love to forgive." He whispered, "Rest now, Mom. I'll carry your grace forever." 7. Legacy. 10 years later, Grace and Son Interiors had expanded to cities far beyond Willowbrook. Every office had a small bronze replica of the original statue in its lobby, and every employee knew the story behind the name, how one act of forgiveness had rebuilt a man's soul. Daniel had married again, this time to someone kind, someone gentle. Together they had a daughter, whom they named Grace. Every night he told her stories about her grandmother, the woman who had forgiven everything and in doing so taught love to everyone. "Daddy," little Grace once asked, "will Grandma ever come back?" Daniel smiled softly, looking toward the stars. "She never left, sweetheart. She's everywhere love is." 8. Full circle. Years later, on a quiet anniversary evening, Daniel returned to the church garden where it had all begun. The statue still stood proudly, gleaming under the fading light. He placed a small bouquet of white lilies at its base and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." Then he looked up at the sky, the first star appearing, and smiled. Because somewhere beyond the clouds, he knew she was smiling too. Epilogue. He had once slapped the woman who raised him, but life had taught him a greater lesson, that the hands which forgive are stronger than the ones that strike, and love, when pure, always finds its way back home.